Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Positive 5 in 5, where we take 5 positive news stories outlining the absolute best of humanity and break them down for you as a nice little bite-sized break from the doom and gloom of everyday life. My name is Jordan. You should be able to see a link to my Minds account right up in the top corner right about there, and you should be able to see a link for our aggregate website where we got all of these from right in the bottom corner right down there. And so, with that out of the way, let's talk about some inspirational words from a fictional character and then get into the news for today. In the wonderful words of Mr. Spock from Star Trek, we have the quote, "It is a cosmic law of the universe that it is always easier to destroy than it is to create." And now, it's this philosophy which really we need to understand in order to understand why something like a positive news blast might be important. See, as humans, we're wired in a way which makes us more sensitive to negative information. And on top of that, it's easier to come by and quantify negative information. Somebody like the news media is going to be very likely to report on an event that comes up along the lines of a terrorist attack, or a bombing, or an economic system collapsing, or a revolution, or a war. And that's because those are things which are destructive, but they're also easily quantifiable. See, unlike progress, something destructive happens almost immediately. And that makes it very easy for people to latch onto. However, on the flip side of that, we have things which are general improvements which take a lot longer to quantify. I actually heard it said once, I think it was from Steven Pinker, that it would be 100% possible for the news to put out a blast every single day on the front page that said 7,000 people raised from abject poverty today. Every single day for the last about 20 years. But we don't do that because that's incremental progress. We understand that things like poverty are important. We understand the fact that the world in general is getting better in a lot of ways, but it's not so easy to quantify because the ideas of improvements are gradual and they're harder to latch onto. So when you look at something like positive news, we're doing that to understand the fact that ultimately the world is getting better. Even if it's little by little, the world around us is not falling into ruin. It's not in total shambles. It's not irredeemable. There are things about the world that we understand that are getting better. And it's for that reason that we're going to jump into the stories that we have today, and we're going to try and take about 5 minutes to go through all of those. So, our first story of today is something that I would classify as strange but awesome. And before I go any further, let me grab my script because honestly, there's no way I'd be able to remember all this content, and this is also just like a first run test footage. Whatever, maybe I'm just a little bit lazy. But, according to CBS News, originally quoting from the Daily Star, a young man by the name of Cross Scott in Tucson, Arizona, managed to save a woman's life using tips that he learned by watching an episode of The Office. According to the Daily Star, quote, when he pulled in front of the white sedan, he saw a woman sitting in the driver's seat. As he approached the car, he noticed that it was rolling. He quickly stuck a big rock under the front wheel. When he saw the woman unconscious, he began banging on her window and yelling for her to wake up. Scott broke the window with a rock. He reached in and unlocked the driver's side door. He checked the woman's pulse and didn't think that she had one, and Scott crawled on top of her. What popped into Scott's head was an episode from the television show The Office, in which main character Michael Scott sings the Bee Gees' Staying Alive while doing chest compressions on a dummy. Overall, this ultimately shows that while the modern age seems to show that people are incredibly divided, there are still good people out there who are willing to do the right thing. In a rather surprising turn of events, our next story comes from the White House itself. According to the Associated Press, Donald Trump is planning on donating $100,000 to alcoholism research. Quote, President Donald Trump has donated his salary from the third quarter of 2018 to a federal agency that researches alcoholism and alcohol-related problems. The White House says that Trump donated $100,000 to the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, end quote. Issues with alcoholism are incredibly prevalent nationwide, and it's easy as American citizens and as a culture to sweep these issues under the rug. Often, it's easier to face issues that seem big, with good guys and bad guys, and somebody that's easy to condemn. But ultimately, we need to remember that there are people out there who are hurting. Agencies like this and these kind of donations are trying to reach people and help them get out of the hole that they're in, and ultimately, that's one of the best things that we can do as a nation. People in general seem to be torn on the police, and for a good reason. There are definitely police officers that are good at their job and some that have made a mess and even destroyed lives. This divide is hard on everyone, but especially the people who serve protecting our local communities. However, there was one instance of compassion and kindness recently that served to show a local police officer that people do care about their law enforcement. According to the Good News Network, a man held an umbrella for a deputy paying her respects to a fallen officer. When a police deputy was paying tribute to a fallen officer, she was unknowingly being honored by a good Samaritan who was standing behind her. Jefferson County Deputy Sheriff Tiffany Dial was standing on a rainy street corner in Birmingham, Alabama, so she could salute a passing funeral procession. The procession was for the late police sergeant Watashia Carter, who had recently died in the line of duty. For 30 minutes, Dial stood at attention at the funeral, end quote. Ultimately, later, the police officer finally got to meet the man in question. But the reason that this story is so important is that it shows a level of empathy and compassion that people tend to forget about. People care about each other. People are grateful that while there may be missteps, there are people out there who are willing to risk their lives in order to protect them and make sure that we're all safe. Ultimately, these are the kind of values we need as a country to keep us moving forward, and I think that's something that really just needs to be highlighted today. In a case of quick thinking in East Bay, California, a local high school senior managed to save a freshman's life after an incident that left her unresponsive and on the floor during PE. According to CBS 5, high school student Brian Canty noticed that there was something wrong when he saw his principal running. He went to help and found freshman Araya Royal on the ground, unresponsive, laying on the gym floor. He stabilized her head and neck until paramedics got to the scene. She spent 6 days in the hospital, 3 of which in the ICU, and she's made a complete recovery and is back to school, and the paramedics say that she has Brian to thank for it. Now, why did I pick this story? Ultimately, it's because there are people out there who are willing to see that people are hurt and go out and help. A lot like basically has been an underlying theme throughout a lot of the stories today. People in general want to do good things, and that's the reason why stories like this matter. He didn't have to help, he wasn't in the room, he wasn't on site, he simply saw his principal running and he went after to check what was wrong. And it's because of that there's a young freshman in high school whose life was saved as a direct consequence. And ultimately, this is the kind of behavior that we need to see from the people around us. Now, all right. And that eventually leads us to our last story for today, which is a case of the super cute. For anyone who keeps up with global politics, you might be aware of the fact that France is currently in a state of turmoil due to the Yellow Vest protest. Inside of that chaos, however, we have our story for today, in which a bunch of giant teddy bears have been found littered all over Paris. According to photos provided by Reuters, we've seen these bears placed inside of shops, wrapped around street poles, stuffed inside of cars, really anywhere that there's room for a giant teddy bear, these teddy bears have been placed. And I'm going to hopefully be showing some videos on screen, but it really depends on how long it takes me to edit out all of the mistakes I've made so far. While this might not be the case of some act of heroism or scientific advance, it's a good way to add a bit of levity in a time that's probably incredibly unsettling for the people of France. And that's it for today's Positive 5 and 5. Links for all the original stories are in the description below. If you like this and want to see more positive news, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if you want to see more of these, there should be some videos linked right here, here, and here. And I'll check back with you guys next time, and I'll see everyone tomorrow.